In Pursuit of the Ultimate Frontier.
The lowest plane is the physical plane, and the next one up is the etheric plane, on which exist the vital bodies of plants and animals. The third plane is the astral plane, where human egos reside when they're not on this physical plane, living in a physical body, where so-called heaven and hell exist, although really they are different mental aspects of the same place. Heaven and hell are not someplace above or below the earth. Human spirits who are operating on the astral plane are all around us. Most of us are just unable to perceive them, but they can see us all the time. Matter of fact, there's nothing that you can do that is not likely to be observed by somebody on some level of higher intelligence or just decarnate human beings.
Welcome to the program, In Pursuit of the Ultimate Frontier, where we explore the infinite possibilities of man's mind to encompass our great universe. Join us in a fascinating adventure as we examine man's heritage and discover the beginnings of a new and dynamic future.
Hello, and welcome once again to In Pursuit of the Ultimate Frontier. My name is Charley Jones. I'm your moderator for this series of discussion programs. With us in the studio is Richard Kenninger, author of the book The Ultimate Frontier, written under a pen name, Eglal Quishana. And it is from The Ultimate Frontier that we will take the basis for the discussions that we have on these programs. Good day, Richard, and welcome to the program.
Yes, how do you do?
Oh, it's real good to have you here again, sir. I guess to focus what we're about to discuss, one of the most amazing things about The Ultimate Frontier, at least in my point of view, is that it takes a world view that is, well, frankly unique in my experience. You seem to have successfully welded some kind of unity between the so-called revealed word that the biblical prophets had a great deal to do with, and modern theories supported by scientific investigation, and you show how one is really just the other end of the other. They seem to be the same piece of cloth here. And for me, this is a unique thing that's tied together. Maybe you might make a remark or two concerning those viewpoints and how you managed to get them together.
Well, the religious and the secular viewpoints each fill in where the other leaves off, so they are very valuable to one another when taken together. I have had many people mention that to me about the book, that seemed to be the most satisfying thing that they encountered in having read it. I guess that we need to see the truth in a more balanced way. Actually, all of this is speculation in the long run, no matter who we are, scientist or religionist. Who knows for sure what happened? We can't know. There's no records. Nobody took any videotapes of what went on. So what we have to deal with is what seems rational. What answers most of the objections? And I think that the Ultimate Frontier has one of its most valuable aspects in that it does present a view which can be approached from the purely rational side, provided you clear away some of the prejudices.
Well, indeed, and at least from my point of view, the worldview that you adopt as your basis for dealing with or relating to your reality, that really determines so much of what you will be able to accomplish. I know that the Egyptians were very aware, oddly enough, although it's relatively a new discovery to our archaeology, that the ancient Egyptians were quite aware of the nutational wobble of the earth. And you make the statement that all physical particles, whether they're earth-size or subatomic, nutate or wobble at the same rate. And I found that rate was an interesting use of terms here because it does not involve speed, it involves size and ratio. Maybe you could give us a quick explanation of nutation, which itself was a new word to me.
Well, it's been around for a long time, and if you were into the physical sciences to any extent, you'd find there's about 4 different entirely unrelated phenomena which are referred to as nutation. Depends upon what your discipline is in which you're using. Most of these things are pretty esoteric terms. And nutation is a motion which relates to the very finest, smallest particles that are available, photons, electrons. I really don't know that I can draw a precise picture of what nutation is, but let me present some analogies that might give you an idea. For instance, the axis of a top that's spinning will have a slight wobble which rotates slowly in a direction opposite to that of the top spin, and that's called a precessional wobble. As you mentioned before, the axis of the Earth has a precessional wobble, and that takes about 26,000 years to complete one cycle. Now, we see a top in the Earth as solid bodies, but when we get down to the subatomic level of electrons, protons, and photons of electromagnetic energy, they are not solid at all. These tiny so-called particles are but swirls of energy. They are really just eddies in what we've come to call basic energy. Another term for basic energy is the ether, which acts like a non-particulate frictionless fluid. Perhaps it would be an oversimplification, but if you could, visualize a photon as one of these tiny donut-shaped eddies in space. As it travels through space at the speed of light, it runs up against an inherent barrier in the ether of which it is formed. The net result is that the photon is annihilated into a waveform, which spreads out into a wave of electrical force in one plane of polarization, and as a magnetic force it spreads in another plane at 90 degrees to the electric wave. These two waves then collapse back in upon themselves to form the donut-shaped ring again. And it chatters along through space in this way by alternating rapidly between a ring-shaped particle and an electromagnetic waveform. And it can do this for billions of years until something interrupts it. The higher the energy that originally drove the photon, the more frequently it bucks against the upper speed limit imposed by the ether, giving the photon wave a higher frequency and a shorter wavelength. Are you getting a picture from that?
Yeah, and what you're saying to me here, and this is new information for me, that this chatter is the actual noise made by a quantum particle bucking the speed of light barrier.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any sound involved, but that's what gives the phenomenon of wavelength, or which we can measure in angstrom units,
yes,
and frequency, which is the inverse of that.
Well, this is an aspect of universal structure, as we're discussing it here, that I'd really like to get into. You talk about 7 planes of existence in The Ultimate Frontier, and you say that the various planes consist of atoms and quanta, and that each plane is differentiated from the others by a difference in the nutational rate, such that the lowest plane can be perceived by anyone or anything composing atoms or matter of a higher plane.
An intelligence can
yes.
perceive it, yes.
Well, I'm sure we're about to run off in all directions from someone who hasn't read the book yet. Why don't you give me a little general description of the 7 planes of existence?
Well, in the first place, no scientific instrument on the physical plane can detect or measure the presence of the higher planes of existence. Atoms and energy of one nutational rate are not en rapport, as it were, with those of a different nutational rate. And inasmuch as the nerves composing man's 5 physical senses are made of atoms of the same nutational rate as those of any other physical instrument, these senses are also unable to perceive the higher planes. However, certain powers inherent in mind can provide the means whereby the upper planes may be seen.
Richard, the implications of those things really open up an entirely new view of reality. As we've said before, it seems to link what metaphysics has said on the one hand and what our empirical science is saying on the other.
Right, and you draw on both of those sources to get the true picture of what's actually happening.
What a mind blower.
Again, clairvoyants have been saying this for a long time because that's what they have seen. That's the instructions that they receive from those who they contact on the higher planes. And so therefore, when you have this picture, things begin to fall into place that just before were a mysterious jumble, and you couldn't make a great deal of sense out of it. Actually, a man who is incarnate consists of 4 bodies at the same time and place. And since there's comparatively large distances between molecules, a man's 4 bodies, each on a different plane of existence, readily interpenetrate one another, and they don't interfere with one another since they are of different nutational rates, which, of course, do not interact.
You're saying that a human being has 4 bodies, not just one.
Correct.
And they simultaneously occur in the same space.
Right.
And because of the relatively large amounts of space in any given atomic structure, there's plenty of room for all that to go on.
The actual distance between atoms is tremendous. It is almost about the same as from one solar system to another solar system.
Physics prof that I had once compared the universe to an atom. And he said if you could see a singular atom at the scale that you are perceiving the solar system on, that the sun would be the nucleus, and the closest electron would be Pluto. The closest one.
10 times further out than Pluto.
Well, maybe you better give us a rundown of the four bodies and more or less how the thing's set up.
Well, of course, a man's physical body on the first plane is the slowest nutational rate.
And that's the physical plane in our day-to-day existence
Right.
we're discussing.
That's the one we all know about. Now, there is an etheric pattern on the second plane, which is known as the vital body. And this acts as a binding force that holds together the physical body.
Keeping the body recognizable from day to day, even though there are
Right.
new cells.
Yeah, well, some cells only last about 2 weeks. You have a complete changeover of every cell in your body every 7 years, and the only ones that are really seeming to be lasting for any length of time are the nerves and the bones. And this, incidentally, also accounts for the fact that wounds heal, why they pull together into a certain shape again. I have seen people with hands that are badly mangled in heavy machinery without any great effort at, let's say, recreation and some sort of cosmetic therapy on that hand. First let it heal to see what you get, and in many cases it looks perfectly normal after a year without having to intervene at all surgically.
There have been a number of cases where people severed digits and then without bothering to clean them simply pressed the severed digit back against the stump until they got to a hospital, and with amazing amounts of adhesion in certain cases.
And probably nothing that had to be done other than putting a bandage around it.
Precisely, some structural stitching to hold it on there.
Right.
Amazing.
And yet, scientists have not, for the most part, detected what that source is. What is that force or energy? Holds things that way. But anyway, that's the first two bodies. Then third, he has an astral body, which is on the third plane of existence. Astral is just one of several names that possibly could be applied to that.
Is this the same term that is common in the various Eastern philosophies?
Yes, it is, and I borrowed on that for the reason that the English language doesn't happen to have a good name for it. And then there's the mental body on the fourth plane of existence, which is where mind power stems from.
As we discussed in our first show.
Right.
Yes.
And of course, the phenomenon of telepathy occurs here on the fourth plane, and mental energy, incidentally, does not follow the same laws as the energy that's on the physical plane by any means. There's a whole new ballgame involved with that. Time does not have an influence on mental energy.
So you're saying that the physical plane is the only place where the rigid structuring of time occurs?
Correct, but also on the second plane. The second plane...
Through its relationship to the...
Right, all the binding forces occur on the second plane of existence, and the physical plane has to correspond to it.
One might say much of the causality that we observe on the physical plane is actually engendered on the second, and the physical plane is just the effect of such. Is that
correct?
Is that roughly correct?
The etheric plane is approximately 2,000 times denser than the physical plane. In other words, in a given cubic measure, let's say a cubic centimeter, a cubic inch, there's about 2,000 times as many atoms on the etheric plane as there are on the physical plane. And so therefore the patterns which are created on the etheric plane have a very strong influence on what happens with the physical.
One of the things you talked about in The Ultimate Frontier was that on the three planes that are directly above the physical existence plane, the one that we have our existence in here, that there are humans on these next three upper planes also.
Right.
What are they doing?
Well, human intelligence is the same on the physical plane as on the higher planes of existence. Whatever concepts you hold here, whatever your character is still the same when you are functioning without a body on the astral plane, for instance. But the whole object, of course, is to evolve one's perception of the universe until you have a true knowledge of what is going on, not just those things which work for you, but which is ultimately recognized by everyone as being the perfect answer to every question that there is. Whatever those questions may be, there is always an ultimately correct answer.
And that is news to a lot of people, that truth can be known, and complete and ultimate truth, not just what you need to get you around the block, but what you need to get you through an entire lifetime.
And beyond. It is the purpose of man to start out on a physical plane in order to learn everything that there is to know here, and then eventually work his way up to the seventh plane. And that all takes a very long time, for there are many lessons to be learned. After one has learned everything there is to know of the first 4 planes of existence as a human being, the next step up from there is to go into angelic existence. Now, no human being from this planet has ever become an angel. Angelic intelligences create planets and evolve life step by step through a conscious evolutionary process under their complete mental control. Archangels, on the other hand, have the job of creating matter and mentally holding together the physical universe, and archangels exist on the 6th plane of existence. Those on the celestial plane, which is the highest or 7th plane, are involved with more esoteric matters like creating new egos, forming and maintaining the laws that govern the universe, and actually organizing the formation of galaxies.
Why don't you just repeat the 7 planes of existence and the names and associations applied to each?
Okay, well, the lowest plane is the physical plane, and the next one up is the etheric plane, on which exist the vital bodies of plants and animals. The 3rd plane is the astral plane, where human egos reside when they're not on this physical plane, living in a physical body, where so-called heaven and hell exist, although really they are different mental aspects of the same place. Heaven and hell are not someplace above or below the earth. Human spirits who are operating on the astral plane are all around us. Most of us are just unable to perceive them, but they can see us all the time. Matter of fact, there's nothing that you can do that is not likely to be observed by somebody on some level of higher intelligence, or just decarnate human beings.
Kind of like Santa Claus, then.
Yeah. Except the gifts are hard to come by.
Oh, yes.
Astral bodies are not at the same nutational rate as physical bodies, and there's no rapport between these 2 forms of matter. The next higher plane is the mental plane, which is where those human beings who have learned everything of the first 4 planes work and reside while they wait to move on to the angelic plane, which is of the 5th nutational rate. And the 6th plane is the archangelic, and the highest is the celestial.
But without being able to perceive the upper planes, except through extreme practice and knowing that they're there and knowing what you're looking for, it's kind of like going to look for a light in a dark room. You have to know where the switch is to get the light on. How did anybody ever find out about the existence of the higher planes?
Well, it's one of the powers inherent in mind that we'd be able to perceive planes beyond the physical. Human beings have the use of mind on this physical plane, and it's within the mental potentials of every one of us to be able to contact persons on the astral plane. That's just supposed to happen naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Our culture tends to block that because it makes us generally not to believe that. It's not accepted in our culture's Christian theology or scientific philosophy. Whereas persons in more primitive cultures do it naturally. Nobody's told them they can't contact egos on the astral plane, so they just go ahead and do it anyway.
Why don't you footnote that with an example of some sort?
Well, for instance, there are several non-technical cultures in the Philippines. And a man there named Tony Agpawa is fairly well known by Americans for his abilities as a psychic surgeon.
Hold it. A psychic surgeon?
Yeah, is a person who is able to open the body and remove diseased portions, for instance, just as a regular surgeon would do. But he uses no instruments of any sort. He just uses his hands.
He spreads the skin apart with his hands?
Yes. And reaches right in and doesn't need to worry about antiseptics or anesthesia.
How incredibly direct. I'm sure the
Yes,
Stanford Medical School would love to hear this.
Right. No, physicians really are not too keen on promoting the idea, but nevertheless his work has been photographed while he was doing such operations, such as open heart surgery, removal of tumors without any medical instruments.
Now, I'm curious, to what does he attribute this ability? I mean, is he educated at all?
Well, he's a medium. I have met the man and I have spoken with him. He states that, of course, that his skills belong to his spirit guides, who are most likely human egos who were physicians when they had been incarnate. I've actually watched one of his operations, and I personally know several of his patients and have examined photos of their operations.
And the effects last are not detrimental?
He warns that people should change their mental attitudes because he feels that most diseases are caused by people's thinking about disease or thinking negative thoughts, either about themselves or about other people. And this tends to bring on disease conditions.
So there are people on this planet who are aware of the full range of human ability, that are not in any way limited by negative thoughts or the prescriptive predispositioning of their society through education.
Yeah, we don't hear about it much in our Western civilization, however. Because,
how is that?
They just can't get published for the most part. There are a few houses that will publish such information, but generally speaking, they have already catered so much to kind of the lunatic fringe of occultism and metaphysics that most people discount anything that's published by them, other than people who are into metaphysics.
Here a while back we were talking about angels and archangels.
And that's pretty metaphysical, isn't it?
Yes, that subject. We talk about being able to see great clouds of hydrogen in space that are probably left over from the Big Bang or whatever theory you ascribe to. If they do not exist per se here on the physical, how do they go about this creation?
Purely mentally. Physical creation begins with archangels. And of course they have to operate within the laws that are established by God on the celestial plane. And they create hydrogen. And they mentally manage to gather this hydrogen together into one area, which is a primordial star. And as gravity keeps pulling these hydrogen atoms closer and closer together, just on the basis of physical law, they begin to heat up until they finally get to a temperature where atomic fusion begins, conversion of hydrogen into helium. This produces an atomic furnace, as it were, in which all the rest of the elements, the natural elements, are created.
The elements for that solar system.
For that solar system. And then in the process of the star getting more and more condensed, it still manages to retain a sort of an angular momentum, and the speed gets higher and higher, and it turns out to be a kind of a flattened sphere, and much matter spews out from the equator of the star as it spins. These gases and dust and what have you are the materials as they're spewed out into space that are gathered up by the angelic intelligences and consolidate that into planets. And they decide what the chemistry is going to be of each of those planets, dependent upon the distance away from the energy source of the star and what kind of life forms they plan to work. You know, that we happen to use a carbon-oxygen system in this planet, but not all the planets do.
Apparently not.
No, because the temperature ranges are such that it wouldn't work out for them. But the human egos that are installed in those bodies are still the same. So the human experience essentially is the same wherever you go in the universe.
Wow. A common denominator then.
All egos are created equal wherever they may be found in the universe.
I can see right now, if the stars were created in place by higher intelligences, not the result of some Big Bang or whatever, what kind of thoughts do you have on the Big Bang Theory?
Of course, I've heard of the Big Bang Theory, and I have read up on it quite a bit. But that's just one theory to which about maybe half the astronomers subscribe. But it has been calculated if all the matter in the universe were to have started out in one place, the gravitational pull would have been so great that nothing could have ever escaped from it.
So what we're driving at here basically is a steady state concept of the universe, right?
Yes, everything was created in place and stays in place. The Tire light theory states that light loses more energy the farther it travels due to continual absorption of its energy as it travels through gravitational and magnetic fields. And this is what causes the light to degrade towards the lower energy red end of the spectrum. And this steady-state concept of the universe is beginning to gain more momentum in physicists' thinking.
Mentioning a moment ago that atomic hydrogen is created by higher intelligence. Now, does this just pop out of empty space when someone thinks about it in the proper frame of mind?
Well, to begin with, space is definitely not empty.
Yeah.
What we call a vacuum actually consists of basic energy, which doesn't happen to have any of the eddies that comprise matter and energy on all the planes. There have recently been some pretty amazing observations in nuclear physics which point out this fact. One instrument that physicists use to track subatomic interreactions is a vapor-filled box called a bubble chamber. As subatomic particles travel through it, they leave vapor trails, and the trajectories and the branching of the trails from a collision or interaction of particles pretty much tells a trained observer what that reaction is. And of course they take photographs of these things to have a perfect record of them. But physicists have noticed that now and then a network of trails would show up which began and ended completely inside the bubble chamber. They call these vacuum patterns, wherein a group of particles appear spontaneously from the space inside the bubble chamber and then annihilate themselves. The universe is somehow constructed so that space is always just on the verge of giving rise to photons of energy and matter. The mental power of the creators of the universe is all that's needed to tip that balance in order to generate atoms and other particles out of the raw basic energy. And it seems pretty likely that man will probably learn soon how to tap this source to provide future motive force rather than continue the use of fossil fuels or nuclear energy.
Richard, we've been dealing with a real large frame of time here. We're discussing a primordial star and the precipitation of its elements into planets and so forth by angelic and archangelic intelligences. Now, we can talk about it in just a few words, but this takes many, many years, eons in some cases. And you say that these are formerly human intelligences that are now working at a higher level directly with and co-creating with God. How is it they don't get bored? Is time? I guess time has to be different for them.
Yes, because billions of years would be very difficult to take. Well, as I said before, not all the other planes of existence are subject to time, even though the physical plane is. For instance, electromagnetic energy traveling across space is diminished in proportion to the inverse of the distance squared. And mental energy is not subject to that law even slightly.
Mm-hmm.
Angels just don't perceive time in the same way that we do. For instance, on the highest plane, the celestial, there is no future or past. There is no concept of what will be or what has been. Everything is. Everything exists simultaneously on the celestial plane. On a mental level, all events that occur send signals that travel forward and backward in time, which, of course, allows people who are able to prophesy to be aware of history as it occurs in the future.
So it takes the advanced skills to intercept the signals in a way that's meaningful.
Right.
Don't modern physicists say something about antimatter in there? About antimatter traveling backward in time? Don't they say something about that?
Yes, true. Paul Dirac definitely stated that there's as much matter as antimatter created every time one or the other is created, and common matter, everyday matter that we're aware of is traversing forward through time, and antimatter is traversing backward in time.
Well, what about
or maybe it's the other way around.
depending on your viewpoint.
Right.
But how about a result preceding its cause, then?
It's not possible for an effect to precede a cause.
Well, I see that our effect has not indeed preceded our cause, but our time seems to be getting a bit skinny here. This has been a thought-provoking session, Richard.
Well, good. I always like to stir people's brains a little.
We'll just say thank you very much, and I'll see you here again next week.
Thank you. I will definitely be here.
All right. You've been listening to In Pursuit of the Ultimate Frontier.